So, first, we're going to read some excerpts from a small book, which I have found to be very helpful to encourage you to slow down and just look at daily life from a new perspective, from a simpler perspective. And this book is called Epictetus, The Art of Living. And it is based on a translation and interpretation of the teachings of a Greek philosopher who lived in the Roman Empire about 3,000 years ago. And this book, this new interpretation, is by Sharon Lobel. Again, here is the book, The Art of Living. And she has translated this into very simple language that anybody can read, even a teenager or a child. So I'm going to read to you just a couple of excerpts. Epictetus, The Art of Living, a new interpretation by Sharon Lobel. Don't surrender your mind. If someone were to casually give your body away to any passerby, you would naturally be furious. Why then do you feel no shame in giving your precious mind over to any person who might wish to influence you? Think twice before you give up your own mind to someone who may revile you, leaving you confused and upset. Evil does not naturally dwell in the world, in events, or in people. Evil is a byproduct of forgetfulness, laziness, or distraction. It arises when we lose sight of our true aim in life. When we remember that our aim is spiritual progress, we return to striving to be our best selves. This is how happiness is won. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. We cannot have a light heart if our minds are a woeful cauldron of fear and ambition. Do you wish to be invincible? Then do not enter into combat with what you have no real control over. Your happiness depends on three things, all of which are within your power: your will, your ideas concerning the events in which you are involved, and the use you make of your ideas. How easily dazzled and deceived we are by eloquence, job title, degrees, high honors, fancy possessions, expensive clothing, or a suave demeanor. Don't make the mistake of assuming that celebrities, public figures, political leaders, the wealthy, or people with great intellectual or artistic gifts are necessarily happy. To do so is to be bewildered by appearances and will only make you doubt yourself. Remember, the real essence of good is found only within things under your own control. People don't have the power to hurt you. Even if someone shouts abuse at you or strikes you, if you are insulted, it is always your choice to view what is happening as insulting or not. If someone is irritating you, it is only your own response that is irritating you. Therefore, when anyone or anything seems to provoke you, it is only your judgment of the incident that provokes you. Don't let your emotions get ignited by mere appearances. Try not to merely react in the moment. Pull back from the situation. Take a wider view. Compose yourself. Now, where it says, don't make the mistake of assuming that celebrities, public figures, political leaders, the wealthy, or people with great intellectual or artistic gifts are necessarily happy. There is one group that is conspicuously missing from in this sentence, and that group is religious and spiritual leaders and figures. We live in a society now where we often give up our free will. We give up our responsibility to people who we imagine are religious leaders or spiritual leaders or community leaders, and we forget that everything we do, we cannot attribute responsibility to our leaders for what we choose to think. If you choose to subscribe to a certain way of thinking, the leader is not responsible. You are responsible. You are always responsible for everything you choose to think, believe, say, or do. Never forget that. Never forget that. Now, I'm going to read some excerpts from a chapter in this book, In the Light of Truth. And this chapter is in the second volume. As I said, this book comes in 3 volumes. 3 volumes. It took me about 2 years to read it from beginning to end. And I originally read it in English. Well, the book was originally written in German. The author was German and used the pen name Abd Rushin. As the years went by, I thought to myself, I would like to read this book in its original language. And so I learned German. And even though I cannot speak the language, I can read the language. And when I read the book in its original German, I realized that anytime a writing is translated from one language to another, much gets lost in translation. The other thing I realized is that the English language in which this book has been translated is High King's English. So I have tried to write down in my own simple language this particular chapter or these excerpts from this chapter that I'm going to read to you. The title of this chapter from the book In the Light of Truth is The Inner Voice. It is chapter number 7 in volume 2 on page 33. The so-called inner voice, which is that which is spiritual in the human, to which he can listen, is the intuitive sense. Not without reason is it said, the first impression is always the right one. As deep truth lies in all these proverbs and axioms, so also here. By impression is understood intuitive sense. For example, What a human senses intuitively at a first encounter with a stranger is either a kind of warning to be cautious, even to the point of complete aversion, or something pleasant to the point of complete sympathy, and in some cases, indifference. If now, in the course of conversation and further communication, this impression is pushed aside or completely effaced through the judgment of the intellect. Now, when you come across the word intellect, think brain, because your intellect resides in your brain. If now, in the course of conversation and further communication, this impression is pushed aside or completely effaced through the judgment of the intellect, so that the thought comes up that the original intuitive sense was wrong, then it almost always turns out at the end of such an acquaintance that the very first intuitive sensing was right, often to the bitter suffering of the one who allowed himself to be misled by the intellect due to the pretense of the other person. The intuitive sense, which is not tied to space and time, and which stands in connection with its own kind, with the spiritual, recognized the true nature of the other person. It did not allow itself to be deceived through the cleverness of the intellect. It is completely impossible for the intuitive sense to be wrong. It so often happens that when humans are misled, there are two causes for the errors, either the intellect or the feeling. How often does one hear it said, "In this or that matter, I once allowed myself to be guided by my feelings and came to grief." One should indeed only rely upon the intellect. Such people mistake the feeling for the inner voice. They extol the intellect and have no idea that it is precisely the intellect which plays a major role in the feeling. Beware of this. Feeling is not intuitive sense. Feeling proceeds from the coarse material body. The body generates instincts which, directed by the intellect, allow feelings to arise. The combined work of the feeling and the intellect, however, gives birth to fantasy. Fantasy is therefore the product of the combined working of the feeling with the intellect. It is fine material, but without spiritual power. For this reason, fantasy can only be retroactive. It can always only influence the feeling of its own producer, but can never by itself send out a power wave to others. Therefore, it only works backwards, retroactively, to affect the feeling of the person whose fantasy it is. It can only kindle his own enthusiasm. It can never affect his surroundings. By this, the mark of its inferior level is clearly recognizable. It is different with the intuitive sense. This carries power within it, creative and enlivening power, and it affects others, streaming outwards, drawing them along, and convincing them. Therefore, we have on one side the intuitive sense, on the other side, body, instinct, intellect, feeling, fantasy. The intuitive sense is spiritual. It stands above conceptions of space and time. The feeling is fine, coarse matter. It is dependent on the instincts and the intellect. Thus, it is on an inferior level. A mingling of the coarse material feeling with the spiritual intuitive sense can never occur. Therefore, there is also no possibility of clouding of the intuitive sense. The intuitive sense will always remain pure and clear because it is spiritual. It will always be clearly sensed or be heard by humans if it really is the intuitive sense that is speaking. But most humans have closed themselves off from this intuitive sense, in that they have spread the feeling over it like a thick cover, a wall, and then erroneously hold the feeling to be their inner voice, through which they experience many disappointments, and then rely all the more only on the intellect, not suspecting that they were able to be deceived precisely through the cooperation of the intellect. Due to this error, they are quick to throw away everything spiritual, which had absolutely nothing to do with their experiences, and they attach themselves even more to that which is inferior. The fundamental evil here, as in many things, is always and again the voluntary subjection of these humans to the intellect which is tied to space and time. The human who completely subjects himself to his intellect also subjects himself completely to the limitations of the intellect, which as a product of the coarse material brain is firmly tied to space and time. Then with this, the human completely chains himself to only the material. Everything the human does occurs from his side and is voluntary. So, he is not perhaps chained, rather, he chains himself. He allows himself to be ruled by the intellect, which by its very nature ties him to space and time. For it could never happen if he himself did not want it. And the intellect no longer allows him to recognize anything which is spaceless and timeless. He no longer understands it. Thus, a cover which is firmly tied to space and time is laid over the spaceless and timeless intuitive sense due to the restricted capacity to comprehend, a limitation, and through this the human can either hear nothing at all, his pure inner voice having faded away, or he is only still able to hear the feeling which is connected to the intellect instead of to the intuitive sense. It would give rise to a wrong conception to say that the feeling suppresses the pure intuitive sense. For nothing is more powerful than the intuitive sense. It is the highest power of the human. It can never be suppressed by anything else or even be impaired. It is more correct to say the human renders himself incapable of recognizing the intuitive sense. The failure always lies with the human himself. never with the strength or weakness of the individual gifts. For the fundamental gift, the real power, the strongest of everything in the human, which bears all life within it and is immortal, is given precisely equally to every individual. In this, no one has any advantage over the other. All the differences lie merely in the use of the gift. This fundamental gift, the immortal spark, can also never become clouded or soiled. It remains pure even in the greatest mire. You must only burst open the cover which you yourselves laid over it through the voluntary limitation of your capacity to comprehend. Then it will, without transition, flame upwards, just as purely and clearly as it was in the beginning, unfolding itself freshly and powerfully, and will connect with the spiritual. Rejoice in this treasure that lies inviolable within you. It makes no difference whether you are considered worthy by your fellow humans or not. Every bit of dirt which has gathered like a dam around this spirit spark can be thrown off through honest good volition. If you have done the work and uncovered this treasure again, then you are just as worthy as one who never buried it. However, this first step can and must come only from the human himself. Otherwise, he cannot be helped. In this, you must strictly differentiate between wishing and volition. Volition means will, your intention. With wishing, nothing is yet done. It does not suffice for any progress. It must be the volition which also determines the deed. It already bears the deed within it. With the earnest volition, the deed already sets in. Therefore, onward courageously. With earnest volition, every path ultimately leads to the goal. This is only one chapter out of many, many chapters in this book, In the Light of Truth. If you have never heard of it or read it, I urge you to get it and start reading it. It's a book you read very slowly. You can't read it fast. It addresses every aspect of life: physical, material, emotional, family, religion, spirituality, nature, science, everything that is part of our experience as spiritual beings in a material world. It raises the question and addresses the question, why are we here? What are we doing here? What's the purpose of it all? Where did we come from? Where do we go from here? I urge you to get the book and read it. You can get the book from the publisher. You can also buy it on Amazon. You can buy it as ebook. You can buy it as an MP3 You can buy it in paperback, hardback, any way that works best for you. So you're asking, how do you recognize what's your inner voice and what's just the chatter in your head or the noise around you? Okay, that's quite simple. Your inner voice only speaks to you in a whisper. If it is yelling at you, it's not your inner voice. If it is rationalizing, that's your brain talking. The inner voice never rationalizes. You know what rationalizing is? Well, it's because of this and, it's because of that. No, because the inner voice is the voice of truth, and truth is absolute. Truth never varies, never changes. It is crystal clear. So it is something that can never be argued with. So those are the two criteria that I would use to determine if what I'm hearing is my inner voice. Is it quiet? Does it tell me as it is, tells me like it is, and then leaves it up to me? That's your inner voice. Okay, and you also want to know, how do I know where I'm hearing it from? Well, like I said, if you're hearing it in your head, it's not your inner voice. Your inner voice is somewhere in the middle of your being. So you have to be quiet and just focus all your senses inward to the core of your being. The other thing I would suggest too is that because we have lost the ability to truly and completely exercise our intuitive sense, we have to start re-exercising it for it to become stronger and more effective. The inner voice has always been pure and it's still pure. It's just that we've covered it with our brain. So we have to uncover it. And one way that I have found has worked for me and may also work for you is each day, each morning, before I start my day, I consciously ask to remain connected with spirit and to remain connected with spiritual guidance. And then I make a note to myself: pay attention, pay attention. Don't become careless. Listen to your inner voice. But if I remind myself first thing before the day begins, today I will remain connected with spirit. Today I will listen to my inner voice at every moment, not just sometimes, but at every moment. And then at the end of the day, I take account of what has transpired in the day. And I give thanks for the moments in which I heard my inner voice and I acknowledge the outcome of hearing my inner voice. And I also take account of the moments when I was not paying attention to my inner voice, and I also acknowledge the consequence which I had to go through. And from that, I learn each day to become more and more conscious and aware of my connection with my inner voice. I hope that helps. So you want to know, where is the help coming to you from when you turn for spiritual help or guidance? And you want to know, who do you pray to for that help? Okay, let's talk about prayer and asking. Prayer is not asking as much as asking is not prayer. We have become accustomed to interpreting our requests as prayer, and that's not true. Prayer is entering into a state of prostration before the creator of all life and giving oneself up to the creator of all life in gratitude and willing to be in harmony with the creation of the creator. That is prayer. You're not asking for anything. You're giving yourself up. But asking is a part of the human spirit's experiencing. When I turn to spirit or to the spiritual and ask for guidance, I am asking for help from spiritual beings who are spirit, who are beings, and they communicate with me through my inner voice. They communicate through the channel of my intuitive sense. There's not enough time in this one workshop to go into the details of how we communicate with spirit. And we will do a follow-up workshop on this same subject, on the subject of the inner voice. But just like if I were to find myself having to make a decision about something and I call up my best friend and ask for their advice, it's the same process. You're turning to spirit, which is truly your best friend, because you are spirit in this foreign place called the material world. And your lifeline is your intuitive sense. Think of it that way. So I hope that this workshop has at least awakened a few questions in you. And now it is up to you to follow through and try to dig up your inner voice from deep within you and begin to listen to it. I would also like to encourage you to read this book. You will never regret reading it. Like I said, it's a book you read very slowly. Take your time. Don't be in a rush. Many people find that the first 3 or 4 chapters are difficult to get through, partly because of the language. The you have to get used to the kind of English, which is not quite our everyday speaking language. So sometimes I often suggest to people who are starting to read the book for the first time to read the introduction, the foreword written by the author himself, and then start with chapter 5. Start with chapter 5. Awake is the title of chapter 5. Wake up. And then read it gradually, page by page, chronologically, to the end of the first volume. After that, once you get to the end of the first volume, go back to the beginning and go back to the beginning and now read it from chapter 1 chronologically. That way, by the time you get to the end of the first volume, you have become accustomed to the language. And then when you go back and start reading chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, it will be much easier for you to understand it. That's just a suggestion, but you don't have to do it that way. You can just start from the first chapter and read along if it's not too difficult for you. I hope that this has been worth your while and that you have received a few pointers that you can now put to use in your daily life. Thank you.